Loki, the trickster god of Norse mythology, is one of the most intriguing figures in the pantheon of ancient Norse lore. Often misunderstood and viewed with a sense of ambiguity, Loki's complex nature as both a mischievous friend and a dangerous foe has fascinated scholars and storytellers alike. Unlike the noble Thor or the wise Odin, Loki's identity is in constant flux, much like his shape-shifting abilities. He exists as a being who defies categories, a figure whose very essence seems to challenge the very nature of gods and men. This god of contradictions weaves in and out of stories, making him both a source of chaos and, paradoxically, one of the most valuable allies of the Aesir gods. His ability to shapeshift, to alter his form at will, is both a gift and a curse, marking him as a being who cannot be easily categorized, understood, or controlled. Loki's shape-shifting extends far beyond mere transformation of his outward appearance. It delves into the very nature of his being, reshaping his essence and purpose within the world. This malleability, this fluidity of form, represents the heart of Loki's chaotic influence on the world around him. While other gods, like Thor, wield their power with a sense of duty and honor, Loki uses his talents for trickery, manipulation, and misdirection, often with no clear goal other than his own amusement or gain. He is not beholden to the same moral compass that governs the Aesir gods. For Loki, the line between right and wrong is blurred, and the only law he follows is that of his own desires and whims. However, to truly understand Loki, it is essential to look at his origins. Born to the giant Farbauti and the giantess Laufey, Loki's beginnings are far from divine. Unlike the Aesir gods, who are born of divine parentage and ruled over the heavens and earth, Loki is a figure from Jotunheim, the land of giants. This dual heritage places him in a unique position within the pantheon. Although he is raised among the gods of Asgard, he is never fully accepted as one of them. The Aesir gods look at him with a mixture of suspicion and fascination, never quite sure whether to trust him or to fear him. Loki's origins as a giant become a key component of his character, as it highlights his outsider status among the Aesir gods. He is a being that is constantly in between worlds, neither fully accepted as a god nor fully rejected as a giant. Despite his ambiguous status, Loki forms close relationships with the Aesir gods, most notably with Thor and Odin. His association with Thor is one of both camaraderie and tension. Thor, the mighty god of thunder, and Loki are often seen together in the myths, embarking on various adventures and quests. At first glance, the two may seem like an odd pair, Thor, the embodiment of strength and order, and Loki, the embodiment of chaos and mischief. However, it is precisely this contrast that makes their relationship so dynamic and compelling. In many stories, Loki's cunning and quick thinking often help Thor out of tight situations, proving that Loki's intelligence and resourcefulness are invaluable to the gods. However, this partnership is always tinged with a sense of unease, as Loki's tricks can easily turn against Thor, and his loyalty is always in question. Odin, the all-seeing and all-knowing god of wisdom, also shares a complex relationship with Loki. While Odin is often portrayed as a wise and calculating leader, he recognizes the value of Loki's unpredictable nature. The gods, for all their might, often find themselves in situations where they must rely on Loki's resourcefulness to navigate the challenges they face. Odin, with his endless thirst for knowledge, sees in Loki a tool, albeit a dangerous one, that can help him achieve his goals. Yet, this relationship is also one built on mistrust. Loki is never fully embraced by the Aesir gods, and Odin, despite his vast wisdom, knows that Loki can never be fully controlled. The god of wisdom is both wary and fascinated by Loki's powers, understanding that the trickster's abilities, while useful, could one day turn on him. This tension between them, Odin's recognition of Loki's usefulness and the simultaneous fear of his treachery, defines much of Loki's role among the gods. But Loki's shape-shifting powers are not limited to his relationships with the gods. They serve as a reflection of his innermost nature, a nature that is fluid, ever-changing, and impossible to pin down. Unlike other gods who are bound by certain roles or characteristics, Loki's shape-shifting ability allows him to inhabit whatever form he desires, whether it be a beautiful woman, a monstrous serpent, or even a mare. It is through this ability that Loki often creates chaos. He uses his powers to manipulate others, tricking both gods and mortals into falling into his carefully laid traps. His shape-shifting is not only a physical transformation, but also a psychological one. It allows him to infiltrate spaces and minds where he otherwise would not be welcome, sowing discord and confusion. One of the most well-known instances of Loki's shape-shifting involves his transformation into a mare. In this story, Loki turns into a female horse to distract a stallion, and in the process, becomes pregnant and gives birth to Sleipnir, Odin's 8-legged horse. This event is symbolic of Loki's unpredictable and chaotic nature. It's an act that brings about something entirely unexpected, just as Loki's presence in the world is often marked by unforeseen consequences. Loki's shape-shifting often leads to situations where his actions spiral out of control, and his devious tricks end up creating more chaos than he originally intended. His very existence seems to be a walking contradiction, as he both helps and hinders the gods in equal measure. The true extent of Loki's dangerous nature, however, becomes evident when he turns his attention toward the gods themselves. His ability to manipulate, deceive, and shapeshift is not just a tool for mischief. It is a weapon he uses to bring about his own goals. In the case of Bald, the god of light, Loki's trickery takes on a far darker tone. Baldur's invulnerability, granted by the gods, becomes Loki's target, and he uses his knowledge of the gods' weaknesses to orchestrate the death of one of the most beloved figures in Norse mythology. This act of betrayal is one of Loki's most notorious and highlights the full extent of his villainous nature. The death of Baldur is a turning point in Loki's story. It sets into motion a series of events that ultimately lead to his punishment and the downfall of the gods. Loki's crimes are not isolated to the death of Baldur, nor to the prankish tricks he plays on the gods. His actions have far-reaching consequences, setting into motion the events that will eventually lead to the destruction of the world at Ragnarok, the end of days in Norse mythology. As the gods prepare for the final battle, Loki's role becomes ever more pivotal. His escape from his chains, his alliance with the forces of chaos, and his role in the death of the gods mark him as a central figure in the apocalypse. Loki's chaotic influence, which began as simple mischief, escalates into full-blown destruction, reflecting his true nature, a being whose very existence is defined by the unraveling of order and the creation of chaos. As we delve deeper into the story of Loki and his shape-shifting crimes, we come to understand that his actions are not merely the result of a malicious spirit or inherent evil. Rather, they reflect the deep contradictions at the heart of his character. Loki is not purely good or evil, but a god whose shape-shifting abilities embody the very chaos and fluidity that define him. His crimes, though devastating, are not entirely without reason. Loki is driven by a need for freedom, for the destruction of the established order, and for a world where everything is in constant flux. He is a god who represents the fragility of life, the unpredictability of fate, and the complex interplay between order and chaos. Through his shape-shifting crimes, Loki becomes both a symbol of destruction and a force that challenges the rigidity of the world around him. In this way, Loki's story is not just one of mischief and betrayal, but also profound existential questioning. What does it mean to be a god? What is the role of chaos in the world? And how does one navigate the fine line between being a hero and a villain? Loki's story invites us to ponder these questions and to explore the complexities of human nature, wrapped up in the ancient myths that have shaped the way we view the world. Thus, the trickster god, with all his shape-shifting crimes, is far more than a mere villain. He is a force that challenges our understanding of morality, identity, and fate. And as we follow his story, we are reminded that sometimes the most complicated characters are the ones who are hardest to define. Loki's origins lie in the heart of Jotunheim, the land of giants, a place where raw power, primal forces, and chaos reign supreme. Born to the giant Farbauti and the giantess Laufey, Loki's heritage was never one of the gods, and yet he found himself a companion of the Aesir, the gods who ruled over Asgard and the realms. The nature of Loki's birth, intertwined with giants and creatures of immense power, left him in a liminal space, neither fully a god nor entirely a giant. This duality becomes an essential part of Loki's identity, a theme that echoes throughout his life and actions. He is a being caught between worlds, existing on the fringe of both the divine and the monstrous, never fully accepted by either group. Raised among the Aesir gods, Loki developed a complex relationship with them. From the very beginning, there was a sense that Loki was an outsider, someone who was never quite part of the divine circle, but never fully rejected either. It's as though he was placed in the world of gods as a way to balance, disrupt, and provoke them. Loki's position within Asgard was always precarious, as he had no direct claim to the throne or to divine authority like Odin, nor did he possess the brute strength and martial prowess that Thor exhibited. What Loki had, however, was something far more potent: his intelligence, cunning, and, above all, his shape-shifting abilities. While the other gods ruled through force, wisdom, or natural talents, Loki ruled through his mind, through deception, and through manipulation. The Aesir gods, particularly Odin, saw in Loki an asset. Odin, who was constantly in search of knowledge and secrets that would help him secure power over the 9 realms, recognized the value of Loki's quick wit and ability to think in ways that were outside of a norm. Although Odin was a god of wisdom and knowledge, Loki's unpredictable nature often allowed him to find solutions or escape from traps that even Odin might not have considered. However, there was always a shadow of suspicion that hung over Loki, and understanding that his actions were not always driven by loyalty or friendship, but by his own desires and whims. In fact, Loki seemed to enjoy keeping the gods off balance, never allowing them to truly grasp his motives or intentions. Thor, on the other hand, had a different relationship with Loki. Unlike Odin, who saw Loki as a tool, Thor often seemed to view him as a companion, one who was always at his side during battles and adventures. Despite their contrasting personalities, Thor, the god of thunder and brute force, and Loki, the god of wit and trickery, the two formed a bond that seemed to be based on mutual respect, albeit with sense of wariness on both sides. Thor's straightforward nature and immense strength were often complemented by Loki's cunning and creativity. It was not uncommon for Loki to save Thor from the consequences of his own impulsiveness, using his shape-shifting abilities to manipulate situations or to trick their enemies. Thor, despite his trusting nature, could never fully rely on Loki, knowing that his trickster friend's loyalty was as fickle as the winds. This partnership, however, was not one built on the foundation of mutual understanding or affection. It was born out of necessity. Thor and Loki, though opposites, needed each other in a world that was constantly shifting, full of threats and challenges. Loki's relationship with Thor was rooted in the unpredictable nature of their world. Together, they would face giants, monsters, and gods, navigating through dangers that often require both physical might and clever manipulation. Yet, even in the heat of battle, there was always a tension beneath the surface. Loki was not a true ally in the traditional sense. He was a wild card, an enigma, a being whose motives were never fully understood. And although Thor relied on Loki's cunning in their adventures, he never trusted him fully, knowing that Loki's shape-shifting abilities could easily turn the tide in ways that Thor might not expect. But Loki's relationship with Odin was even more complex. Odin, the god of wisdom, knew better than to fully trust anyone, least of all Loki, who had a tendency to deceive and manipulate. However, Odin was also a god who recognized the importance of knowledge and foresight, and Loki, with his trickster ways and ever-changing nature, provided a unique source of insight. In a sense, Odin saw in Loki something that could not be found in the other gods, a mind that operated outside of the rules, one that saw the world in a different light. Loki's unpredictability, however, was both a blessing and a curse. Odin understood that if Loki were ever to betray them, whether for personal gain or simply out of mischief, the consequences could be disastrous. Yet, despite this, Odin never completely cast Loki aside. He relied on him when necessary, but he never let his guard down. The gods of Asgard, despite their power, never fully trusted Loki, knowing that his loyalties could shift with the wind. The relationship between Loki and the other gods, then, can be understood as one of uneasy collaboration. The gods tolerated Loki's presence because of his usefulness, but they always knew that they were walking on a razor's edge with him. There was an underlying tension in every interaction, an awareness that Loki could, at any moment, turn on them if it served his own interests. This sense of unease only grew as Loki's actions began to grow bolder and more dangerous, his shapeshifting becoming not just a tool for pranks and trickery, but a weapon that could destroy the very foundations of the god world. What made Loki even more unsettling was his ability to embody so many different roles at once. He could be a friend and an enemy, a helper and a hindrance, all in the same breath. His shape-shifting allowed him to take on whatever guise was necessary to achieve his goals, whether it be for personal amusement or to carry out a more malevolent plan. This fluidity made him a being impossible to predict, and it was this unpredictability that made him so dangerous. He could be trusted only in the sense that he was consistently inconsistent. His actions did not follow any clear pattern or moral code, and his allegiance was not fixed in any one place. For Loki, loyalty was a transient concept, something that could be given or taken away at a moment's notice. This, in many ways, mirrors the larger themes in Norse mythology itself, where the gods are not omnipotent or infallible, but instead are subject to the whims of fate, fate that even Odin, with all his wisdom, could not escape. Loki, in this sense, is a reflection of the chaotic forces that exist in the world, forces that cannot be controlled, cannot be predicted, and cannot be avoided. The gods may rule over Asgard and the 9 realms, but they are not immune to the unpredictable tides of fate, and it is Loki's role in the myths to embody this chaos. He is the trickster, the force that pushes against the established order, the one who reminds the gods that their power is not absolute and that the world is in constant flux. Loki's actions, however, were not solely motivated by a desire for chaos. At times, his mischief seemed to serve a greater purpose, perhaps to test the gods, to provoke them into revealing their true nature, or simply show that they were not invincible. There was a part of Loki that seemed to be driven by curiosity, a need to understand the boundaries of power and order, and perhaps even a desire to challenge the gods themselves. His relationship with the Aesir was not one of simple antagonism, but one of constant testing and pushing against the limits of their authority. This constant tension between Loki and the gods was part of what made him such a fascinating figure in Norse mythology. He was both a catalyst and an obstacle, a being whose presence was necessary to move the stories forward, but whose actions were never predictable. As the stories unfold, Loki's position in Asgard becomes increasingly precarious. The gods' reliance on him grows, but so does their suspicion. They need him, but they fear what his next move might be. In this way, Loki's story is one of both opportunity and danger, a story that reflects the chaotic and ever-changing nature of the world itself. Loki, as a character, is one that refuses to be confined by any one identity. He is not bound by the roles that the gods of Asgard play. He is not the wise king, like Odin, nor the mighty warrior, like Thor. Instead, he is a shapeshifter, an agent of chaos, a being whose very existence defies categorization. And it is this fluidity of identity, this refusal to be pinned down to any one form, that makes Loki such a compelling figure in Norse mythology. It is through this very fluidity that he becomes both a friend and an enemy to the gods, and ultimately, a harbinger of the end times. Loki's relationships with the Aesir gods are among the most complex and tumultuous in Norse mythology. He is not an ally in the traditional sense. His connections with Thor, Odin, and others in Asgard are marked by a unique blend of camaraderie, mutual respect, and suspicion. These relationships defy simple categorizations, reflecting Loki's enigmatic nature and the fluidity that defines his existence. His interactions with the gods are never entirely straightforward. They are laced with uncertainty, manipulation, and a constant undercurrent of tension. At the heart of these relationships is Loki's unpredictable nature, his trickster persona that blends deceit with genius, mischief with a sense of deep intelligence. It is this very duality, this capacity for both good and evil, that allows Loki to straddle both sides of the divine spectrum, to be both a helpful companion and a dangerous adversary. Perhaps the most famous relationship Loki shares is with Thor, the god of thunder. Thor, with his immense strength and straightforward nature, is everything that Loki is not. Thor's embodiment of power and order, whereas Loki represents cunning, chaos, and mischief. Despite these stark differences, the two share a close, albeit complicated, bond. Thor's straightforward approach to problem-solving often relies on brute strength, while Loki's approach is rooted in intelligence and cleverness. This complementary dynamic forms the basis of their partnership. Throughout the myths, we see the two gods working together, with Loki's wit and Thor's might often combine to overcome various challenges. Yet, this partnership is always tinged with underlying tension. Thor, for all his reliance on Loki, never fully trusts him. Loki is a being whose loyalty is always in question, and Thor's instinctive mistrust of him is well-founded. Thor may need Loki to solve certain problems, but he is never blind to the fact that Loki's motives can be self-serving and that his allegiances can shift with little warning. The stories involving Loki and Thor often showcase this uneasy alliance. In one particularly memorable tale, Thor's hammer, Mjolnir, is stolen by the giant Titoem, who demands the goddess Freya as his bride in exchange for its return. Unable to retrieve the hammer through force alone, Thor turns to Loki for help. Loki, ever the opportunist, devises a plan in which Thor disguises himself as Freya, while Loki accompanies him as a bridesmaid. The plan works and Mjolnir is returned, but the entire adventure is built on deception and trickery, hallmarks of Loki's influence. While Thor's strength is indispensable in many situations, it is Loki's cleverness that frequently saves the day. Yet, even as Thor benefits from Loki's plans, there is always a lingering sense that their bond is one of necessity rather than genuine trust. Thor's reliance on Loki's intellect is grudging at best, and Loki's tricks are never entirely appreciated. Odin, the All-Father and God of wisdom, has a relationship with Loki that is far more layered and cautious. Unlike Thor, who approaches Loki with a mixture of trust and suspicion, Odin views Loki with more calculated wariness. As a god of wisdom and foresight, Odin understands that Loki's unpredictable nature makes him a valuable asset in certain situations. His ability to think outside the box, to understand things that others might overlook, is a skill that Odin finds useful. Loki is often brought into Odin's plans, especially when the gods need to navigate complex situations that require subtlety and ingenuity. However, Odin's relationship with Loki is built on necessity and manipulation, rather than genuine friendship. Odin recognizes the value of having someone like Loki around, someone who can challenge the status quo and force the gods to think differently, but he never fully trusts Loki. Odin, for all his wisdom, knows that Loki cannot be controlled or contained. He is a god who cannot be pinned down, and Odin's recognition of this fact only deepens his ambivalence toward him. In many ways, Odin sees Loki as both a useful tool and a dangerous liability, someone whose actions can easily turn against the gods if left unchecked. The relationship between Loki and Odin becomes even more strained as Loki's actions grow more erratic and destructive. As Loki's shape-shifting crimes begin to escalate, Odin's need for him becomes less about partnership and more about containment. In the aftermath of Baldur's death, one of the most significant events in Norse mythology, Odin's view of Loki shifts from one of cautious cooperation to outright betrayal. The death of Baldur, a beloved and invulnerable god, is the result of Loki's manipulations, and the consequences of this act mark a turning point in Loki's relationship with the Aesir. Odin, who once saw in Loki a useful ally, now views him as a dangerous traitor, someone who has crossed a line that cannot be undone. Loki's role in Baldur's death shatters any lingering illusions Odin might have had about him, and the god of wisdom is forced to reckon with the fact that Loki can no longer be trusted. Odin's relationship with Loki is one of calculated control, but it is also one of deep unease. As the god who sees and knows all, Odin understands that Loki is an agent of chaos, a force that cannot be fully understood or contained. And as Loki's crimes grow more severe, Odin becomes increasingly aware of the threat that his trickster companion poses to the very fabric of the god's existence. Beyond these two central relationships, Loki's interactions with the other gods of Asgard are similarly fraught. His relationship with Freya, the goddess of love and beauty, is one of casual disdain. Freya, who holds dominion over fertility and love, represents a force of harmony and balance, everything that Loki's nature is not. Although there are no stories that directly depict a close relationship between Loki and Freya, it is likely that their interactions were marked by mutual suspicion. Freya, like the other gods, would have seen Loki as an unpredictable element, one whose actions could easily undermine the peace and order that she represents. Loki, on the other hand, would likely have viewed Freya as a symbol of the kind of stability and predictability that he resented. In many ways, Freya and Loki represent opposing forces, one focused on harmony, the other on disruption, and their interactions, when they do occur, would have been marked by this tension. Loki's relationship with the other Aesir gods, Tyr, the god of law and justice, and Heimdall, the ever-vigilant guardian of the Bifrost Bridge, can be seen as similarly antagonistic. Tyr, as the god who represents law and order, would have been a natural adversary to Loki, whose very nature is to undermine the established order. Tyr's role in the myths is to uphold justice and protect the laws of the gods, while Loki's role is to subvert those very laws. The tension between the two is almost palpable, as their values are diametrically opposed. Heimdall, the ever-watchful guardian of Asgard, would also have viewed Loki with suspicion. Heimdall's duty is to protect the gods and keep watch over the realms, and Loki's chaotic influence would have been seen as a direct threat to the safety of the gods. Their interactions, if any, would likely have been brief and fraught with mistrust. In contrast to the tension with the other gods, Loki's relationship with his own family is equally complicated. His wife, Sigyn, is one of the few figures who remains consistently loyal to him, even in the face of his most heinous crimes. Sigyn's devotion to Loki, particularly during his punishment, is one of the most tragic aspects of Loki's story. While Loki is bound to a rock and subjected to constant torment, Sigyn stands by him, holding a bowl to catch the venom that drips onto his face. This act of love and loyalty contrasts sharply with the betrayal that Loki has wrought upon the gods and his own family. Sigyn's loyalty to Loki is often interpreted as an act of profound devotion, but it is also a tragic reflection of the complicated nature of Loki's relationships. Loki's family, his children too, are marked by this same complexity. His son, Fenrir, is bound by the gods because of the threat he poses, while his daughter, Hel, rules over the realm of the dead. Even Loki's children reflect the chaos and destruction that he embodies. In sum, Loki's relationships with the gods are a study in contradiction. He is both an ally and an adversary, a source of aid and a harbinger of destruction. The gods recognize his usefulness, but they never fully trust him, knowing that his unpredictable nature could turn against him at any moment. His connections with them are based on necessity, suspicion, and a constant tension between order and chaos. Loki's interactions with the gods are not based on loyalty or affection, but on the need for survival and the constant shifting of allegiances. He is a figure who embodies the fragility of trust and the complexity of power, reminding the gods that their strength is not enough to control the unpredictable forces of chaos that Loki represents. Loki's first major shape-shifting crime, which marked a pivotal moment in his journey from mischievous trickster to full-blown menace, centers around an incident involving a giant stallion and Loki's transformation into a mare. This event, seemingly trivial at first glance, becomes a foundation for a series of increasingly dangerous and morally complex actions that would define Loki's chaotic influence over the gods and the world. The crime itself, Loki's transformation into a mare to distract the stallion, appears as one of his more innocent tricks, designed to satisfy a need for mischief or personal gain, but it sets off a chain of consequences that ripple throughout the myths and ultimately change the course of Norse history. At the heart of this story lies a giant named Builder, who had made an ambitious offer to the gods of Asgard. In exchange for building a fortress strong enough to protect Asgard from the threats of the giants, Builder demanded a hefty price: the goddess Freya, the sun and the moon, and an impossibly tight deadline. At first, the gods, being gods of power, wisdom, and combat prowess, were skeptical of Builder's ability to complete such a monumental task. But as the Builder proved himself capable, and his stone walls began to rise with remarkable speed, the gods grew anxious. They realized that the price he had demanded, the marriage of Freya, the sun, and the moon, was not something they could afford. Freya, the goddess of love and fertility, was beloved by the gods, and the idea of losing her was unthinkable. The sun and the moon, too, were indispensable to the order of the cosmos, and a part with them would bring an end to the harmony that the gods so carefully maintained. It was then that Loki, ever the opportunist, devised a plan. His role in the Asgardian hierarchy was never that of a ruler or a warrior, but of a trickster, and it was through this role that he would manipulate events to his advantage. Loki, who was skilled in the art of deception, knew that he could use his shape-shifting abilities to sabotage Builder's progress without breaking his agreement with the gods. This is where Loki's cleverness and ruthlessness came into play. Instead of simply denying the giant's request, he hatched a devious scheme that involved taking on the form of a mare. His idea was to distract Builder's stallion, who was helping the giant pull the massive stones required to complete the construction, and by doing so, delay the progress and ultimately prevent the Builder from finishing the work on time. Transforming into a beautiful mare, Loki lured the giant stallion away from construction site. The stallion, a creature of great strength and beauty, was so enchanted by Loki's mare form that it abandoned its work with Builder to pursue the trickster. Loki, in his mare form, led the stallion on a wild chase through the fields and forests of Asgard. The chase lasted for days, and in the process, the giant's work was delayed. Loki's actions may have seemed innocent on the surface, but the repercussions of this simple act of shape-shifting were anything but. Loki's plan succeeded in distracting the stallion, and thus preventing completion of Builder's fortress. The giant, realizing that his work had been sabotaged, was forced to accept a new deal, one in which he would not receive the payment he had initially demanded, and his project was ultimately abandoned. Loki, having successfully executed his plan, returned to his original form, satisfied with the outcome. However, the story didn't end there. Loki's transformation into a mare, while it had successfully delayed Builder's project, had more far-reaching consequences than he had ever anticipated. The chase that he had initiated with the stallion resulted in an unexpected twist. Loki, in his mare form, became pregnant. In the aftermath of the chase, Loki gave birth to Sleipnir, a magnificent 8-legged horse, who would go on to become one of the most important and iconic creatures in Norse mythology. Sleipnir was a steed of Odin, the All-Father. It was through this unexpected birth that Loki's role in the fate of the gods would be cemented. The birth of Sleipnir was not a simple event. It was an act that carried both weight and symbolism. Sleipnir, born of Loki's shape-shifting trickery, became a symbol of the trickster god's immense power and his ability to create chaos, even in the most unexpected of circumstances. While Sleipnir was a magnificent creature, one that would eventually serve Odin himself, its origins were rooted in deception, mischief, and manipulation. Loki's crime, the transformation into a mare and the subsequent delay of Builder's work, had now led to the birth of a creature that would ride alongside Odin in the most significant battles of the gods. It was a twist of fate that no one could have predicted, least of all Loki himself. But Loki's actions did not simply stop with the birth of Sleipnir. The repercussions of his trickery reverberated throughout the pantheon of gods. The gods, having relied on Loki to sabotage Builder's construction, were forced to confront the fact that their ally was not the trustworthy figure they had once believed him to be. While Loki had, in one sense, saved Asgard by preventing the construction of the giant's fortress, he had done so through deception, and this deception had led to the birth of a creature that, while valuable to Odin, was a constant reminder of Loki's manipulative nature. Sleipnir's very existence was a testament to Loki's ability to create chaos and to subvert the natural order. The gods, who had once relied on Loki's trickery and cunning to help them in various adventures, now found themselves questioning whether they could trust him any longer. Loki's actions in the aftermath of the stallion chase and his eventual transformation into a mare demonstrated the extent of his unpredictability. What had seemed like a harmless act of mischief, a simple trick to delay a giant's work, had ultimately led to the creation of an otherworldly steed, and more importantly, had revealed the depth of Loki's chaotic influence on the world. Loki's actions would no longer be viewed merely as harmless pranks. They would now be seen as dangerous and far-reaching crimes that had the potential to alter the balance of the gods. Despite the consequences of his crime, Loki's role within the pantheon remained secure. Odin, despite knowing the dangers of Loki's unpredictable nature, could not deny the value of his shape-shifting abilities. Loki had successfully helped the gods avoid a catastrophe, and the birth of Sleipnir, while born from deception, was not without its advantages. Sleipnir would go on to serve Odin in battle, and would become a vital asset in the coming War of the Gods. In this sense, Loki's crime, while it may have caused discomfort and unease among the gods, was also a necessary act. It had delayed Builder's construction and ultimately prevented the giant from getting what he had demanded. But it also led to the creation of one of the most powerful creatures in Norse mythology. As with many of Loki's actions, there is a paradox at play. Loki's crime was, in essence, an act of mischief that led to a series of consequences that were both beneficial and disruptive. Sleipnir, the product of Loki's deception, became a symbol of both Loki's power and his danger. The horse was a creature of great beauty and strength, and its creation was a direct result of Loki's cunning and manipulation. In this way, the very act that was intended to sabotage the giant's project also paved the way for a new ally to Odin, one whose power would be felt during the greatest of battles. For Loki, however, The consequences of his actions were not as straightforward as they appeared. While Sleipnir's birth was a symbol of his abilities, it was also a reminder of his chaotic nature and the unpredictable consequences of his shape-shifting. The gods, despite their reliance on him, could never fully trust him again. His crime, while benefiting them in some ways, had also set into motion events that would eventually lead to the unraveling of Asgard. Loki's role in the birth of Sleipnir was a moment that highlighted his ability to shape the world around him, but it also underscored the dangers of his influence. A god whose shape-shifting powers could bring both creation and destruction in equal measure. In many ways, the story of Loki's first shape-shifting crime is a precursor to the larger role he would play in the myths. His actions, both subtle and extreme, are woven throughout the tales of the gods. He is a figure who represents the fragile line between order and chaos, a god whose tricks can either save or destroy. The birth of Sleipnir, as unexpected and seemingly trivial as it may seem, is a key moment in the mythology of the Norse gods, a moment that highlights Loki's power, his unpredictability, and his ability to shape the fate of the gods in ways they could neither foresee nor control. It is a reminder that Loki, for all his mischief and chaos, is a central figure in the mythos of the gods, a god whose actions reverberate through the ages, leaving a lasting impact on the world and on the very fabric of reality itself. Loki's ability to shapeshift is central to his role as one of the most unpredictable and fascinating figures in Norse mythology. But Loki's shapeshifting powers are not merely a way for him to create mischief or to escape consequences. His transformations serve as a deeper reflection of his character, his desires, and the nature of chaos itself. His ability to transform into different creatures, humans, and even gods speaks to his essence as a god of contradictions, a being whose very nature is fluid, shifting, and impossible to pin down. Each of his shape-shifting crimes is a manifestation of the chaos that he embodies, a reminder that nothing in the world, not even the gods, can escape the pull of change and unpredictability. Loki's shape-shifting is not simply about taking on different forms. It is about transcending the boundaries of what is possible and what is expected. While most of the other gods in Norse mythology are tied to specific roles and identities, Thor is the god of thunder, Odin as the wise all-father, Freya as the goddess of love and beauty, Loki exists outside of these fixed categories. His transformations, in a way, allow him to break free from the constraint of these roles, to slip through the cracks and reshape not just his appearance but his very essence. Loki is never tied to a single identity, and it is his fluidity that makes him so dangerous. He cannot be trusted because he can never be fully understood. At any given moment, he might be a friend or an enemy, a helper or a saboteur, and this duality makes him a figure both of fascination and fear. Perhaps the most significant transformation that Loki undergoes is his change into a mare, an event that becomes a crucial moment in the mythology of the gods. This transformation, which occurs during the story of the giant builder who promises to construct a fortress for the gods in exchange for Freya's hand in marriage, is a perfect example of Loki's complex relationship with both the gods and the giants. The giants demand that he marry Freya, the goddess of beauty, and take the sun and moon as his price threatens the very balance of the cosmos, and the gods are desperate to find a way to stop him. It is in this moment of crisis that Loki decides to intervene, using his shape-shifting abilities to create chaos. Loki transforms into a mare, not just as a way to distract the stallion that the giant is using to help him complete his work, but also as a means to create further complications in an already complex situation. Loki's transformation is the spark that ultimately delays the completion of the giant's work, but it also leads to an unforeseen consequence. Loki becomes pregnant and gives birth to Sleipnir, an 8-legged horse that will become Odin's steed. Loki's transformation into a mare is significant because it highlights not just his shape-shifting abilities, but also his willingness to manipulate situations for his own gain. While the gods benefit from Loki's intervention in the giants' plans, Loki's actions are driven by a need to subvert the established order and to see the gods in a state of disarray. In this instance, Loki's crime is not just about preventing construction of a fortress. It is about shaking the foundation of the gods' power and making them aware of their own vulnerability. Loki, through his shape-shifting, becomes the embodiment of the chaos that lies at the heart of existence. His ability to shift form serves as a reminder that nothing, not even the gods, is immune to the unpredictable forces of change. In addition to his transformation into a mare, Loki also takes on the form of other creatures throughout the myths, each transformation serving as a reflection of his chaotic nature. One of the most famous instances of Loki's shape-shifting is when he changes into a serpent in order to escape from the consequences of his actions. This transformation occurs after Loki's role in the death of Balder, one of the most beloved gods in Norse mythology. Loki's trickery leads to the death of Balder, and in the aftermath, the gods turn on him, demanding retribution for his treachery. Loki, ever the escape artist, transforms into a serpent in order to evade capture. This transformation is not just about physical escape. It is symbolic of Loki's deeper nature as a creature who exists beyond the rules of order. The serpent, in many cultures, is a symbol of deception and transformation, and by taking this form, Loki embraces his role as a creature of chaos, a being who is constantly shifting and evolving in ways that defy the gods' attempts to control him. Loki's ability to become a serpent also speaks to the danger he poses to the gods. As a serpent, he is not just a trickster. He is a creature of destruction, a symbol of the primordial forces that exist outside of the gods' control. The serpent is often seen as a creature that operates in the shadows, lurking beneath the surface of the world and waiting to strike. In taking on this form, Loki becomes the embodiment of the darkness and disorder that threatens the gods' carefully ordered world. The fact that Loki chooses the form of a serpent is significant because it reflects his nature as a being who operates in the margins, who exists outside of the light of order and reason. But it is not just through his shape-shifting that Loki creates chaos. His transformations also have a deeper symbolic significance, one that speaks to the nature of the world itself. In Norse mythology, the gods are constantly grappling with the forces of chaos and disorder, and Loki is a personification of this struggle. The gods represent order, law, and structure, but Loki exists outside of these confines. His shape-shifting abilities allow him to transcend the boundaries that define the gods, and in doing so, he challenges the very idea of what it means to be a god. Loki's transformations, therefore, are not just about physical appearance. They are a challenge to the gods, authority, a reminder that they are not all-powerful, and that the world itself is in a constant state of flux. Loki's shape-shifting also allows him to manipulate the other gods, playing on their weaknesses and fears. In one of the most famous stories involving Loki, he transforms into a fly in order to disrupt a feast held by the gods. This seemingly harmless prank escalates into a full-blown crisis, as Loki uses his small, elusive form to provoke and sow discord among the gods. His transformation into a fly is a perfect example of how Loki uses his shape-shifting abilities to manipulate situations and to expose the vulnerabilities of the gods. Despite being a small, seemingly insignificant creature, Loki is able to cause tremendous chaos simply by altering his form and using his intellect to outmaneuver the gods. The relationship between Loki and the gods is built on this constant tension. Loki, with his shape-shifting and cunning, is a reminder that the gods' power is not absolute. The gods may rule over the 9 realms, but they are constantly under threat from forces beyond their control. Loki's role as a shapeshifter, as a being who can take on any form, represents the fragility of the gods' power. No matter how strong, wise, or powerful they may be, the gods are always vulnerable to forces of chaos, and Loki embodies this truth. His shape-shifting serves as a constant reminder that the world is not a static place. It is in a constant state of flux, and no one, not even the gods, can escape the forces of change. Loki's ability to transform into different creatures also ties him to the primordial forces of nature. In many cultures, shape-shifting is seen as a link between the human and animal realms, a way to connect with the natural world and its underlying mysteries. Loki's transformations, particularly into creatures like serpents, maras, and flies, place him outside of the human and divine worlds and link him to the untamed forces of the universe. He is a figure who exists in the liminal spaces between worlds, constantly shifting between one form and another, unable to be defined or contained by any one identity. This fluidity of form and identity is what makes Loki both fascinating and dangerous. He is a god who cannot be easily understood or predicted, whose actions are driven by an ever-changing desire for freedom, mischief, and subversion. His ability to transform allows him to break free from the constraint of the world around him, to transcend the roles that the gods have assigned to him, and to become something entirely different. And it is through this ability to change to become anything and everything that Loki's shape-shifting crimes become so powerful. Every time he transforms, he rewrites the rules of the world, creating chaos, challenging authority, and reminding the gods that their world is not as secure as they would like to believe. Loki's shape-shifting abilities are not the only source of his power and influence. His intellect, cunning, and mastery of manipulation set him apart from other figures in Norse mythology as he navigates complex webs of relationships, intrigues, and dangers that the gods often find themselves entangled in. While the gods are bound by their roles, Thor, the god of thunder, Odin, the god of wisdom, Freya, the goddess of love, Loki exists as something else entirely, a being who transcends categories and refuses to be defined by any single identity. His abilities and actions continually challenge the gods, often placing them in positions of vulnerability, revealing the fragility of their dominance in the 9 realms. One of the most notable instances of Loki's intellectual prowess comes in the tale of the golden apples, which were essential to the gods' immortality. These apples, which came from the Garden of Eden, were what kept the gods youthful and strong. Without them, the gods would age and lose their vitality, and their power would wane. When Loki, in one of his typical acts of mischief, tricked Idun into leaving Asgard with her apples, he unknowingly set in motion a catastrophic series of events. The giant Jotzi, disguised as an eagle, swooped in and abducted Idun, taking her and the apples back to his own realm. The gods, once ageless and invincible, began to wither and grow old, realizing that their immortality was dependent on the apples that Loki had carelessly, or perhaps purposefully, stolen from them. When the gods realized what had happened, they turned to Loki, as he was the one who had caused the crisis. Loki, ever the manipulator, was quick to offer a solution, but not without expecting something in return. To retrieve Idun and the apples, Loki needed to perform another feat of shape-shifting and trickery. In this case, he would transform into a fly and sneak into the giant's stronghold. Using his ability to transform, Loki would trick Jotzi into releasing Idun and return the apples to Asgard. However, the price for Loki's help was steep. He demanded the release of his own freedom, knowing that his role in the theft of the apples would not go unnoticed. Despite his tricks and misdeeds, the gods were always forced to rely on him when faced with dire circumstances, and in this instance, Loki's cleverness saved them. Yet, Loki's involvement in the theft of the apples illustrates a deeper aspect of his character. He is not simply a mischief maker, but a force of nature that disrupts the natural order of things. His actions are not always motivated by malice, but by a desire to shake things up, to create movement where there is stagnation. Loki represents the chaotic, unpredictable forces that lie beneath the surface of the divine order. His actions reveal the underlying tension between the forces of chaos and those of order, the fragile balance that the gods maintain in their realm. What makes Loki particularly dangerous is that he does not act out of a desire for power or wealth, but because he understands that true power lies in the ability to alter the course of events, to shift the balance, and to leave the gods unsure of their next step. It is this subtle manipulation, this ability to use both his intellect and his shape-shifting powers, that makes Loki so dangerous. He does not need brute strength or physical power like Thor, nor does he rely on wisdom alone like Odin. Instead, Loki is a master of the mind, a figure who works behind the scenes, pulling strings and creating ripples that can lead to massive consequences. He doesn't need to destroy his enemies directly. Instead, he sows confusion and doubt, playing the gods against each other and making them question their own judgments. In this sense, Loki operates not in the realm of physical destruction, but in the realm of psychological warfare. He knows that the gods' greatest strength lies in their confidence and unity, and by eroding that foundation, he brings them to their knees. Loki's intellect is further demonstrated through his role in the creation of Mjolnir, Thor's famous hammer. This is a story that illustrates Loki's ability to manipulate both the gods and the giants, playing one side against the other for his own amusement, or for a specific purpose. The story begins when the gods of Asgard were faced with the threat of the giant Brock, who was a skilled blacksmith. He had made a wager with Loki, claiming that he could forge better items than Loki's companion, the dwarf Ivaldi, who had crafted magical items for the gods. Loki, never one to back down from a challenge, accepted the wager, though he was not entirely confident in the outcome. As the gods watched, Brock and Ivaldi began their work, It was clear that the stakes were high. Brock, having a deep understanding of magic and the craft of blacksmithing, created 3 objects that were to rival anything Loki could offer. The first was a hammer Mjolnir, Thor's weapon, which would become one of the most famous artifacts in all of Norse mythology. The second was a golden boar, Gullinbursti, that could run faster than any horse. And the third was a ship, Skidbladnir, that could be folded up to fit in a pocket, but would always have a favorable wind when it set sail. These 3 objects were so powerful that even the gods themselves marveled at their beauty and magic. Loki, on the other hand, had promised to provide 3 items that would be equally impressive. In his typical fashion, Loki was not concerned with the craftsmanship of the objects, but rather with the manipulation of the giants and gods. He used his shape-shifting abilities and trickery to create distractions while the objects were being forged. One of his tricks, in which he transformed into a fly and bit the blacksmith's hands, caused Brock to make a small mistake while forging the hammer. The result was that Mjolnir, while a magnificent weapon, ended up with a short handle, which would later prove to be both a flaw and a unique characteristic of the hammer. Despite the setback, Mjolnir became Thor's weapon of choice, and it was this very hammer that would be instrumental in protecting Asgard from the giants and other threats. But it was Loki's interference, his ability to manipulate the process, that led to Mjolnir's eventual creation. Loki's role in the creation of Mjolnir is emblematic of his character and his relationship with the gods. He is not someone who directly creates or destroys. Rather, he manipulates the world around him, using his cunning and intellect to shape events in ways that no one could foresee. In this story, he plays the role of both the trickster and the creator, a being who moves through the world without being bound by its rules, yet whose actions have far-reaching consequences. His involvement in the creation of Thor's hammer is not merely a random event, but one that demonstrates how Loki can shape the destiny of the gods through his intelligence and cleverness. The hammer Mjolnir, despite its flaw, becomes a powerful weapon that Thor uses to defend the gods and the 9 realms. However, the story also reveals a crucial aspect of Loki's character. He is never simply an agent of chaos for its own sake. His actions, though disruptive, often serve a larger purpose, even if that purpose is not immediately clear to the gods. Loki, through his manipulation of events, ensures that the gods have the tools they need to defend themselves from the threats that loom over Asgard. In many ways, Loki is a necessary evil, a being who, despite his disruptive nature, plays a crucial role in the survival and strength of the gods. Loki's intellect, combined with his shape-shifting powers, makes him a figure of both immense power and danger. His manipulation of situations, his ability to control the course of events without directly intervening in the physical realm, is what sets him apart from other gods like Thor, who rely on brute strength, or Odin, who relies on wisdom and foresight. Loki operates on a different level, one where the mind, the ability to deceive, and the power to manipulate are just as important, if not more so, than physical might or divine knowledge. Loki is a figure who exists in the shadows, working behind the scenes to shape the fate of the gods and the 9 realms. He is both their ally and their adversary, a god whose intellect and shape-shifting abilities make him as unpredictable as the forces of chaos themselves. And it is this very unpredictability that makes him so dangerous, for no one, not even the gods, can ever truly know what Loki will do next. Loki's transformation into a mare and the subsequent birth of Sleipnir represent one of the most intriguing and symbolic moments in Norse mythology. However, the consequences of this act extend far beyond the creation of the 8-legged steed that would serve Odin. The birth of Sleipnir signals a pivotal moment in Loki's relationship with the gods, a turning point where his actions, initially seen as mischief or trickery, take on deeper and more unsettling implications. This event reveals a darker side of Loki's character, a side that is both self-serving and deeply tied to the fate of the gods and the world. It is in the aftermath of this strange birth that Loki's role in the eventual downfall of the gods begins to take clearer shape. The story begins with Loki's deception of the giant builder, who had agreed to construct a fortress for the gods in exchange for an exorbitant price. The gods, eager to secure the protection from the giants, agreed to the terms, but they soon realized the enormity of the task. As the builder made remarkable progress on the fortress, the gods began to fear that they would be forced to fulfill their part of the bargain, which would have involved sacrificing Freya, the sun, and the moon. It was Loki, ever the opportunist, who devised a plan to prevent the completion of the fortress. In an effort to sabotage the builder's progress, Loki transformed into a mare and lured the giant stallion away from its work. The resulting chase, which lasted for days, caused significant delays, and the builder was unable to meet his deadline. However, Loki's transformation had unintended consequences, as he became pregnant and gave birth to Sleipnir, a powerful 8-legged horse. The birth of Sleipnir is one of the most bizarre and unsettling elements of the story. Loki, a male god, gives birth to an animal that will become one of the most revered creatures in all of Norse mythology. This event, though it initially seems like a mere footnote in Loki's ongoing trickery, is laden with symbolism. In many ways, the birth of Sleipnir reflects Loki's chaotic nature. His role as a shapeshifter and trickster is emphasized through this act of transformation, but also underscores the fluidity and unpredictability of the forces of nature. Loki, who has always existed on the margins of the divine order, becomes a symbol of that very disorder, a force that cannot be easily understood or controlled. The birth of Sleipnir also highlights the ambiguous nature of Loki's identity. While the gods of Asgard are clearly defined by their roles, Thor is the god of thunder, Odin as the wise ruler, and Freya as the goddess of love, Loki occupies a space that resists definition. He is neither fully good nor entirely evil. He is neither a straightforward ally nor a clear adversary. Instead, Loki exists in a state of constant flux, and his actions reflect this fluidity. The birth of Sleipnir, then, is not just an isolated incident. It is a manifestation of Loki's complex nature. It symbolizes his ability to transcend traditional boundaries, both physical and moral. The gods, who are usually able to rely on their distinct roles and powers, are unable to anticipate or control Loki's behavior, and it is this unpredictability that ultimately makes him so dangerous. Despite the chaos Loki's transformation causes, Sleipnir's birth is not entirely negative for the gods. Although the circumstances of Sleipnir's conception are unusual, the steed proves invaluable, especially to Odin. Sleipnir becomes Odin's trusted mount, carrying him through the 9 realms, including into battle and even to the depths of the underworld. Sleipnir is an extraordinary creature, unmatched in speed and strength, and it is this unique combination of abilities that makes it so desirable. While the birth of Sleipnir may have been a result of Loki's trickery, the creature produced becomes an asset to the gods, especially Odin. This creates a strange paradox in Loki's actions. What initially seems like a chaotic, disruptive act ultimately leads to something of great value. The ambiguity of Loki's actions, whereas mischief and chaos often result in unintended benefits, can be seen as a central theme throughout his interactions with the gods. Loki is not a villain in the traditional sense. He does not seek power or revenge. Instead, he is driven by a desire to upset the status quo and to reveal the flaws in the gods' carefully ordered world. His actions often leave the gods in precarious positions, forcing them to adapt and confront the consequences of their own choices. And yet, despite the chaos he sows, Loki's role in the divine order is undeniable. He is a catalyst for change, a force that keeps the gods on their toes and ensures that they are never too comfortable in their power. In many ways, Loki's relationship with Odin is emblematic of this dynamic. Odin, despite knowing Loki's chaotic nature and often dubious loyalty, recognizes a value in having Loki around. Odin, who seeks to maintain control over the 9 realms and the fates of the gods, understands that Loki's unpredictability is both a threat and a necessary element in the larger cosmic scheme. Loki's trickery and ability to alter events, while dangerous, are often what prevent the gods from becoming complacent. It is through Loki's interventions that the gods are forced to confront their own weaknesses, and it is this tension between stability and chaos that defines the relationship between Loki and the gods. The birth of Sleipnir, then, serves as a reminder of the complex nature of Loki's role in the pantheon. It is an event that defies easy interpretation, just as Loki himself resists easy categorization. Loki's shape-shifting crime, his transformation into a mare, which led to the creation of an 8-legged horse, is both a moment of cosmic mischief and a significant turning point in the mythology of the gods. The birth of Sleipnir symbolizes the unpredictable nature of existence itself, where even the most chaotic actions can give rise to something of great power and significance. Loki, the god of change and transformation, is not simply a disruptor of order. He is also a creator of new possibilities, even if those possibilities emerge from the most unlikely of sources. However, it is important to note that Loki's role in the birth of Sleipnir is not just a moment of divine mischief. It has lasting consequences that shape the future of the gods and the nine realms. Loki's shape-shifting crimes, particularly his involvement in the creation of Sleipnir, demonstrate his ability to affect the world in ways that the gods cannot fully understand or control. While Sleipnir is a valuable asset to Odin, it also serves as a reminder of Loki's ability to disrupt the divine order. The gods, despite their immense power and wisdom, are ultimately at the mercy of Loki's unpredictable actions. This tension between Loki and the gods reaches its apex in the events surrounding the death of Balder, one of the most beloved and revered gods in Norse mythology. Balder's death, which is directly caused by Loki's treachery, is a key turning point in the mythology, marking the beginning of the end for the gods of Asgard. Loki, once seen as a mischievous but essential figure in the divine order, becomes a symbol of the forces that threaten to unravel the gods' carefully constructed world. His actions, once seen as mere tricks or harmless pranks, take on a more sinister tone as the gods begin to realize that they cannot control or contain him. Loki's role in the death of Balder, the god of light and innocence, cements his position as the ultimate harbinger of chaos and destruction, a being whose actions will ultimately lead to the downfall of the gods. In this light, the birth of Sleipnir becomes a symbol not just of Loki's chaotic nature, but the precariousness of the divine order itself. The gods may have benefited from Loki's intervention, but they are also at the mercy of his actions. The birth of Sleipnir, like many of Loki's tricks, is a double-edged sword. While it provides the gods with a powerful ally in the form of Odin's steed, it also reinforces the idea that Loki's influence cannot be controlled. The gods, for all their power and wisdom, cannot escape the influence of chaos that Loki embodies. And in the end, it is this chaos, unleashed through Loki's cunning and trickery, that will bring about the destruction of Asgard and the death of the gods. The relationship between Loki and the god of Asgard is a complex web of cooperation, betrayal, and tension. For much of their shared history, Loki occupies a peculiar space in the pantheon of Norse gods. He is not a pure antagonist like the giants, nor is he a flawless hero like Thor. Instead, he is something much more difficult to define: a shapeshifter, a trickster, and a god whose loyalties cannot be easily pinned down. His actions, though often disruptive and even dangerous, are also essential to the unfolding of the cosmic drama. Loki's role, particularly in the events leading to Ragnarok, the end of the world, is a key reflection of the ambivalence surrounding his character. While the gods may despise his tricks and deceit, they are paradoxically dependent on his abilities to achieve their goals. However, as time goes on, the gods find themselves increasingly uneasy with Loki's unpredictability and his growing penchant for chaos. In the early tales of Loki, his shape-shifting crimes are often seen as mischievous but harmless acts. He is, in many ways, a cosmic prankster, capable of shifting his form at will to create confusion, sometimes to help the gods, and at other times to undermine them. His ability to turn into various animals, humans, and even other gods makes him a figure that transcends the boundaries of the divine and the mortal realms. His actions often seem motivated by nothing more than a desire to sow chaos for its own sake. However, as the myths unfold, it becomes clear that Loki's trickery serves a deeper, darker purpose, one that is tied to the ultimate fate of the gods themselves. One of the most significant moments in Loki's relationship with the gods comes when he orchestrates the death of Balder, one of the most beloved and virtuous gods in the Norse pantheon. Balder, known for his beauty, wisdom, and kindness, is a figure that symbolizes purity and light. His death, brought about by Loki's manipulations, marks the beginning of the end for the gods. The story of Balder's death is tragic not only because it leads to the eventual fall of Asgard, but also because it highlights the extent to which Loki's actions have devastating consequences. Balder's death is a catalyst for the chain of events that will culminate in Ragnarok, the apocalyptic battle between the gods and the forces of chaos. Loki's role in Balder's death begins with the discovery that Balder is immune to all forms of harm. After a series of strange dreams in which Balder is forewarned of his impending death, the gods, worried for their beloved comrade, seek a way to ensure his safety. They make a pact with every object in the world, from metals to plants, to never harm Balder. As a result, the gods begin to play a game in which they throw weapons and other dangerous objects at Balder, only to find that nothing can harm him. This game, which was meant to showcase Balder's invulnerability, is a symbol of his power and the peace that reigns in Asgard. However, Loki, ever the agent of chaos, sees an opportunity to disrupt this harmony. Loki, using his shape-shifting abilities, disguises himself as a woman and seeks out Frigg, Balder's mother, who is the only one who had not sworn an oath not to harm Balder. Disguised, Loki tricks Frigg into revealing that the mistletoe plant, which she had overlooked, is the only thing that could harm her son. Loki, seizing upon this knowledge, crafts a dart from mistletoe and gives it to the blind god Hr, Balder's brother. Loki tricks Hr into throwing the mistletoe dart at Balder, resulting in Balder's death. The gods, horrified by what has happened, are powerless to stop it, and Balder is taken to the underworld, where he remains until Ragnarok. The death of Balder is a turning point in the myths of the Norse gods. It marks the beginning of the unraveling of the divine order. Loki's role in this event is crucial because it reveals the extent of his ability to manipulate and deceive even the most noble and innocent of gods. The death of Balder is not simply an unfortunate accident. It is a deliberate act of sabotage, a manipulation by Loki that sends shockwaves through Asgard. In many ways, the death of Balder is Loki's ultimate crime, a crime that seals his fate and sets him on a path that will lead to his eventual imprisonment and punishment. While Loki's role in Balder's death is the most significant example of his growing malevolence, it is not the only instance in which he sows chaos among the gods. His ability to manipulate and deceive has a long history. In the tale of the theft of Idun's apples, for example, Loki is responsible for tricking the goddess Idun into leaving Asgard, where she is captured by the giant Jotzi. Idun's apples are the source of the gods' immortality, and without them, the gods begin to age and weaken. Loki, in this case, acts out of both self-interest and malice, as he seeks to cause trouble for the gods. While Loki eventually helps to retrieve Idun and restore the apples to Asgard, his involvement in the theft highlights the destructive potential of his actions. Similarly, Loki's role in the creation of Mjolnir, Thor's hammer, underscores a way in which his trickery can have both positive and negative consequences. Loki, who had made a bet with the giant Brock, tricked the blacksmith into creating the hammer, but in doing so, he ensured that the hammer would be imperfect. Despite its short handle, Mjolnir became one of the most powerful weapons in the Norse pantheon, capable of defeating giants and other threats to Asgard. Loki's manipulation of the forging process highlights his ability to alter events for better or worse, depending on his whims. The growing tension between Loki and the gods is reflected not only in these stories, but also in the way the gods begin to view Loki. Despite his many contributions to their victories and successes, the gods increasingly view Loki with suspicion. His unpredictability and lack of loyalty make him a dangerous ally. The gods, for all their power, are unable to control Loki, and his ability to manipulate situations with ease threatens their authority. The gods' reliance on Loki begins to erode as they realize that they are walking a fine line between using his talents for their own benefit and allowing him to destabilize their world. In the final chapters of Loki's story, his treachery reaches its zenith, and he becomes a central figure in the destruction of Asgard. As the gods prepare for the end of the world, they are forced to confront the fact that Loki, once one of their own, will play a leading role in their downfall. In the prophesied event of Ragnarok, Loki is fated to lead the forces of chaos against the gods. His children, Fenrir, the great wolf, Jormungandr, the world serpent, and Hel, the goddess of the underworld, are key players in this final battle. Loki's transformation into a force of destruction is the culmination of his shape-shifting crimes, his manipulations, and his increasingly hostile relationship with the gods. The mythology surrounding Loki's role in Ragnarok is one of betrayal, destruction, and inevitability. In the final moment of the gods' reign, Loki breaks free from his chains, where he had been imprisoned for his role in Balder's death. He joins forces with the giants and other creatures of chaos, leading them into battle against the gods. The gods, despite their immense power and wisdom, are unable to prevent the downfall that Loki has set in motion. The battle between the forces of order and chaos culminates in the death of nearly every major god, including Odin, Thor, and Freya. As the world is consumed by fire and destruction, Loki's role as the agent of chaos is complete. He had fulfilled his destiny as the ultimate disruptor, the being who brings about the end of the world and the death of the gods. The finality of Loki's betrayal and his role in Ragnarok are a stark reminder of the fragile nature of divine power. The gods, for all their might, cannot escape the forces of chaos that Loki embodies. His shape-shifting crimes, which seem harmless at first, ultimately lead to the destruction of everything the gods had worked to preserve. Loki's story is not just one of mischief and trickery, but of profound consequences. It is a tale of a god whose actions, though seemingly insignificant in the moment, have the power to unravel the very fabric of the cosmos. In the end, Loki is both a symbol of the chaos that exists in the world and the inevitable force of destruction that will one day bring an end to the gods and their reign over Asgard. Loki's betrayal, however, was not merely a result of his own malice, nor was it a singular act. The nature of his deceit, its profound and far-reaching consequences, was a culmination of years of tension, manipulation, and complex dynamics between him and the gods. For much of their shared history, Loki served as both a companion and a provocateur, often standing by the gods in times of need, only to later betray them in moments of weakness. His actions, like his shape-shifting abilities, were unpredictable and often paradoxical. While he was capable of helping the gods in their most dire moments, his assistance was rarely without strings attached. And ultimately, it was his very ambiguity, his ability to both create and destroy, to forge alliances and then shatter them, that made him such a dangerous figure in the mythology of the gods. Loki's rise from mischief maker to the ultimate harbinger of doom is a story that begins not with his transformation into a mare or the theft of Idun's apples, but with the underlying fractures in his relationship with the gods. From the very beginning, Loki's role in Asgard was ambiguous. Unlike Thor, the god of thunder, whose strength and role as protector of Asgard were clear, or Odin, the god of wisdom and sacrifice, whose sovereignty and knowledge guided the realms, Loki's position was elusive. He was neither wholly good nor entirely evil, neither a god of creation nor one of destruction. This fluidity allowed him to be a figure of both admiration and suspicion. The gods, for all their power and wisdom, needed Loki. Time and again, it was his cunning, his intellect, and his ability to manipulate situations that saved them from otherwise insurmountable dangers. Whether it was helping the gods recover Idun's apples from the clutches of the giant Jotzi, or enabling construction of Thor's mighty hammer Mjolnir, Loki was the one they turned to when they found themselves in a bind. But his acts of heroism were rarely born of pure altruism. There was always something beneath the surface, a hidden motive or personal gain that Loki sought. And the gods, though grateful for his interventions, began to recognize this, a realization that would foster the seeds of distrust. In many ways, Loki thrived in the tension between his nature as a god of chaos and his dependence on the gods of order. He was not bound by their sense of duty or honor. He did not adhere to their expectations or roles. Instead, Loki existed to challenge these very structures. He was a trickster in the truest sense, a being who reveled in disrupting the expected, in challenging the divine laws that govern Asgard and the 9 realms. He was the embodiment of unpredictability, and his actions were often motivated by a desire to see the gods, whom he both envied and resented, react to face the consequences of their own arrogance. The first cracks in the gods' trust in Loki began to show after the death of Balder. The fact that Loki was responsible for the death of the beloved god marked a dramatic shift in how the gods viewed him. Balder was a shining light of Asgard, the embodiment of innocence and goodness. His death, orchestrated by Loki's trickery, was more than just a personal tragedy for the gods. It was a sign of something deeper, a portent of the destruction that was to come. Balder's death was not a random act. It was the culmination of a series of Loki's manipulations and a harbinger of the great chaos that lay ahead. By orchestrating the death of Balder, Loki symbolized a breakdown of the very moral fabric of the gods' world. The event shattered the illusion of safety and invulnerability that the gods had held. It was a profound reminder that, no matter how powerful or wise they might be, they were not immune to chaos. Balder's death set off a chain of events that led the gods closer to their ultimate fate, Ragnarok, the final battle between the gods and the forces of chaos. Loki's role in this apocalyptic event had already been foreshadowed long before the death of Balder. His children, the monstrous wolf Fenrir, the world serpent Jormungandr and the goddess of the underworld, Hel, were destined to play pivotal roles in the end of the gods. Loki's progeny were creatures of destruction, beings who represented the forces of chaos and the dissolution of the old order. In many ways, the gods' fate was sealed the moment Loki's children were born. They embodied everything that threatened the gods: chaos, death, and destruction. The gods, particularly Odin, understood that Loki's actions were not isolated events but part of a greater plan. Loki was not just a trickster or a rogue. He was a force of nature, an inevitable agent of change. His role in the destruction of the gods was as much a part of the cosmic order as their creation had been. The gods' resistance to this inevitable fate, their denial of the destructive forces that Loki embodied, would be their undoing. Loki's role in the events leading up to Ragnarok was not just that of a mere catalyst. He was the orchestrator, the one who would bring about the final dissolution of Asgard and the death of the gods. The gods' recognition of Loki's growing malevolence culminated in his imprisonment. After the death of Balder and the growing threats posed by his monstrous children, the gods could no longer tolerate Loki's presence in Asgard. They sought to punish him for his role in Balder's death, for his betrayal, and for his increasingly dangerous behavior. Loki, ever the escape artist, fled from the gods and took refuge in the far reaches of the world. But the gods, determined to bring him to justice, eventually captured him and imprisoned him in a cave. He was bound to a rock with the entrails of his own son, and a venomous snake was placed above him, its poison dripping onto his face. Loki's wife, Sigyn, stood by him, holding a bowl to catch the venom. But whenever she had to empty it, the poison would fall onto Loki's face, causing him to writhe in pain. This punishment, though brutal, was a fitting end to Loki's role in the divine drama. The pain he endured in his imprisonment was not just physical. It was symbolic of the way in which Loki had brought suffering to the gods and the world. His suffering in the cave mirrored the suffering he had caused in Asgard and beyond. Yet, even in his imprisonment, Loki's influence was not entirely extinguished. As the myths tell us, it was Loki's release at the time of Ragnarok that would bring about the final battle between the gods and the forces of chaos. Loki, freed from his chains, would lead the giants and other creatures of chaos in the battle against the gods. It was Loki's role as the ultimate antagonist, the embodiment of chaos and destruction, that would bring about the end of the world as the gods knew it. But his return, his final act of betrayal, was not just the culmination of his personal vendetta against the gods. It was a necessary part of the cycle of the cosmos. The gods' defeat and their subsequent death was part of a larger cosmic plan, a process of renewal and transformation. In many ways, Loki's betrayal was an essential part of the inevitable collapse of the divine order. The gods could not defeat him, for he was not simply a foe to be vanquished. He was a force that could not be controlled or contained. Loki's actions, ultimately, serve as a reminder that the forces of chaos and destruction are not external threats to the gods, but intrinsic to the very fabric of existence. The gods, despite their wisdom and power, could never fully escape the inevitability of change, decay, and death. Loki, as both a trickster and a destroyer, represented the collapse of the old order and the necessary destruction that would precede the birth of a new world. His role in Ragnarok, his betrayal, and his ultimate destruction of the gods were not acts of personal malice, but parts of a larger cosmic narrative. The gods, for all their power, could not outwit or defeat the force of chaos that Loki embodied. In the end, it was chaos that would consume them, and it was Loki who would lead the charge. The gods' world was always precarious, and Loki's actions were the manifestation of that precariousness, an unavoidable reminder of the fragility of existence, the constant tension between order and chaos, and inevitable destruction that comes with the passage of time. The nature of Loki's eventual downfall and his role in the cataclysmic events of Ragnarok are inextricably tied to his actions throughout the myths and his complex relationships with the gods. Loki's trajectory in Norse mythology is one that shifts from playful trickery to profound betrayal, and it is the culmination of his manipulation, deceit, and chaos that make him one of the most fascinating and ominous figures in the entire mythos. It is through his betrayals, particularly those tied to the gods' most cherished members and their sacred values, that he not only incites the final destruction of Asgard, but becomes the ultimate agent of change in the cycle of creation and destruction that defines the very essence of Norse cosmology. Loki, the trickster god, is ultimately the harbinger of the gods' own end, and his fate in the mythology reflects the paradox of his existence. Though he is a source of chaos, he is also the necessary catalyst for the renewal of the world. In the aftermath of Baldur's death, Loki's influence reaches its full potential. His role in the destruction of Baldur is not simply a moment of mischief gone too far. It is a profound turning point that sets into motion the events of Ragnarok. Loki, ever the trickster, was not content with merely causing harm in the moment. He sought to change the very course of history itself. In the death of Baldur, he struck at the heart of the divine order. Baldur's death was not just a loss to the gods in terms of their collective grief, but a rupture in the fabric of their perceived invulnerability. Baldur, whose life symbolized purity, goodness, and the eternal order of the gods, was untouchable, or so they believed. Loki's involvement in his death shattered that illusion, exposing the vulnerability even of the gods themselves. The gods, who had long taken comfort in their near-invincible status, were now faced with a reality they could no longer ignore. They, too, were mortal, and even their most beloved could fall. The ramifications of Baldur's death are felt immediately. The gods are left in a state of deep mourning, a sorrow that foreshadows the darker days ahead. Baldur's absence casts a shadow over Asgard, a shadow that grows heavier as the gods realize the true consequences of Loki's actions. Baldur, after all, had not only been loved by the gods, but was also integral to the preservation of order in the Nine Realms. With his death, the gods' connection to the realm of light and goodness was severed, and the balance of the cosmos began to tilt toward chaos. The gods' realization that they were powerless to prevent the death of one of their own, and profound guilt they felt for their inability to bring Baldur back, only deepened the divide between them and Loki. Loki's treachery, while devastating in itself, sets in motion a chain of events that leads to his ultimate downfall. While the gods mourned Baldur's death, they did not immediately recognize Loki's role in the tragedy. It is only through Loki's increasing arrogance and betrayal that the gods finally come to understand the extent of his role in the destruction of their world. Loki, however, remains unrepentant. His actions are not born out of malice alone, but rather from a deep-seated resentment and jealousy of the gods' power and order. Loki is a figure who is not satisfied by mere mischief. He is driven by a desire to challenge the gods' supremacy, to expose their weaknesses, and, ultimately, to bring about the collapse of the very world they have worked so hard to protect. In the wake of Baldur's death, Loki's relationship with the gods becomes increasingly strained. The gods are now acutely aware of the danger he represents, but they are also bound to him. Despite his crimes, they are reluctant to act decisively against him. Loki's role as a trickster, his usefulness in times of need, has made him an uncomfortable yet indispensable figure. The gods are conflicted, unsure of how to handle Loki, and it is this very ambiguity that allows Loki to continue his manipulations. He thrives in the space between good and evil, between order and chaos. He is both a servant and a master, a figure who is neither fully loyal nor fully treacherous. And it is this duality that makes him so dangerous. The gods cannot easily categorize him, and thus they cannot fully anticipate the scope of his actions. It is only after Loki's increasing involvement in the actions that lead directly to Ragnarok that the gods are forced to act. His betrayal, which began with the death of Baldur, culminates in the ultimate destruction of Asgard. As the gods prepare for the final battle, they realize that Loki's treachery will play a crucial role in the defeat they are about to face. Loki, whose shape-shifting abilities have allowed him to deceive and manipulate throughout the ages, becomes a figure whose treachery cannot be undone. The gods now understand that Loki's role is not merely that of a trickster, but that of a destroyer, one whose machinations are leading them inexorably toward their doom. Loki's fate, however, is not simply one of betrayal and destruction. It is also one of punishment. After his role in Baldur's death is revealed, the gods capture Loki, binding him to a rock with the entrails of his own son. The venomous serpent that drips poison onto Loki's face is a symbol of his eternal torment. Loki's suffering in the cave is not just physical. It is symbolic of the suffering he has caused the gods. In his imprisonment, Loki is forced to confront the consequences of his actions. His punishment is not simply for his misdeeds, but also for the ripple effect they have had on the cosmic order. Loki's suffering mirrors the suffering he has brought to the Nine Realms, a suffering that will only intensify as the events of Ragnarok unfold. While Loki is imprisoned, the seeds of Ragnarok continue to grow. Loki's children, Fenrir, the monstrous wolf, Jormungandr, the world serpent, and Hel, the goddess of the underworld, are central figures in the coming destruction. These creatures, born of Loki's union with the giantess Angerboa, represent the forces of chaos and destruction that will bring about the downfall of the gods. Fenrir, bound by the gods in an attempt to prevent his rise, will break free at Ragnarok and devour Odin. Jormungandr, whose massive size wraps around the earth, will fight Thor to the death. Hel, ruler of the underworld, will unleash the dead to join in the final battle. The gods are unable to control or contain these forces, and Loki's involvement in their creation is a reminder of the inherent chaos that underpins the world. Loki's imprisonment, however, does not mark the end of his role in the world's destruction. When the time comes for Ragnarok, Loki breaks free from his chains. His escape is not simply a release from physical bondage, but a symbol of his role in the final dissolution of the old order. As he joins the giants and other creatures of chaos, he becomes a leader of the forces that will bring about the end of Asgard and the death of the gods. Loki's return is a harbinger of doom, a moment when the gods' worst fears are realized. The final battle of Ragnarok is a tragic and inevitable conclusion to the gods' struggle against the forces of chaos. The gods, despite their strength, wisdom, and valor, cannot overcome the monstrous forces that Loki has set in motion. The gods' death in Ragnarok are symbolic of the cosmic cycle, death, destruction, and renewal. The gods, like all things in the world, must pass away to make way for something new. But Loki's role in their downfall cannot be overlooked. He is both the agent of destruction and the catalyst for rebirth. In his treachery, he sets the stage for the renewal of the world after the end of the gods. The ultimate irony of Loki's role is that, though he destroys the gods, he also paves the way for the creation of a new world, one that will emerge from the ashes of the old. Loki's betrayal of the gods and his ultimate involvement in their destruction reflect the cyclical nature of Norse mythology, where creation and destruction are inextricably linked. The gods are not eternal. They are bound by fate, just as all things are. Loki, the trickster and harbinger of chaos, plays a key role in the cosmic balance. His actions, though seemingly motivated by malice and spite, are part of a larger, necessary process, one in which death and destruction lead to renewal and transformation. Loki's story, from his mischievous beginnings to his ultimate betrayal, is a tale of inevitable change. As the gods fall and the world is consumed in the flames of Ragnarok, Loki's legacy is cemented as a god who brought both ruin and rebirth to the realms. His complex relationship with the gods is a reminder that order and chaos are never truly separate. They are two sides of the same coin, bound to each other by the forces of fate. Loki's legacy in Norse mythology is a deeply complex and multifaceted one, and as the stories unfold, his influence over the gods and the realms continues to grow. He is not merely a figure of chaos or mischief, but rather a pivotal force that brings about the destruction and renewal of the world itself. In the aftermath of his actions, particularly his role in the death of Baldur and his involvement in the impending events of Ragnarok, the gods of Asgard find themselves trapped in a web of fate from which there is no escape. Loki's trajectory, from a companion and trickster to the ultimate adversary of the gods, serves as a stark reminder of the nature of existence itself. A delicate balance between order and chaos, creation and destruction, birth and death. One of the most striking aspects of Loki's role in mythology is his ability to embody the very forces of nature that the gods struggle to control. The gods, despite their immense power, are constrained by their own nature and the roles they are bound to. Odin, for example, is the wise and eternal ruler, bound to the fate of the gods and the realms. Thor is a protector, the god of thunder whose strength is his defining characteristic. Freya is a goddess of love and beauty. Her power is tied to fertility of the earth. But Loki, with his fluidity and shape-shifting abilities, is neither confined by these roles nor by the laws of nature. He is, in many ways, an embodiment of the unpredictable forces that underlie all things. The gods, for all their might, cannot fully contain or comprehend the power that Loki wields. He is a force of transformation, a god whose ability to change the very fabric of reality makes him both an ally and a threat to the divine order. As the myths progress, Loki's increasing involvement in the events of Ragnarok serves to highlight the essential role that chaos plays in the cosmos. In the stories of the gods, There is an underlying belief in the inevitability of fate, an idea that the gods are bound to their roles, and that all things must eventually come to an end. This is where Loki's presence becomes so significant. His role in the death of Baldur is not just an isolated act of malice. It is the breaking of a cosmic law, the first crack in the facade of the gods' invulnerability. The gods, who had long believed in their supremacy, are suddenly forced to confront the reality that they, too, are subject to the forces of fate. And in this moment, Loki's actions become a symbol of the broader truth of the cosmos. No being, no matter how powerful, can escape the inevitable cycle of death and rebirth. Loki's transformation from a trickster god to a harbinger of doom is not a sudden one. His actions, while disruptive from the very beginning, are not initially seen as outright malevolent. In his early tales, Loki is a companion to the gods, often providing assistance or guidance when the gods find themselves in difficult situations. His cunning, wit, and shape-shifting abilities make him an invaluable ally, one whose talents are crucial to the gods' victories. Whether it is helping Thor recover his hammer or retrieving Idun's apples from the giants, Loki's contributions are often seen as indispensable. However, it is clear from the very beginning that Loki's loyalty to the gods is not unwavering. His actions are motivated less by a desire to help and more by his need to challenge the established order. Loki's ability to shift allegiances, to move seamlessly between friend and foe, is one of the defining characteristics of his nature. Unlike the gods, who are bound by their roles and their duties, Loki is free to act on his own whims, driven by his desire to create change, disrupt stability, and force the gods to confront their own weaknesses. He is, in many ways, a mirror to the gods. Where the gods represent order, Loki represents chaos. But unlike the gods, whose powers are limited by their roles, Loki's powers are limitless in scope. He can shift his form at will, becoming anything from a bird to a fish, a woman to a stallion. His ability to change his shape is a metaphor for fluidity of existence itself, the constant flow between creation and destruction, life and death. This fluidity in Loki's nature is key to understanding his ultimate role in the events leading up to Ragnarok. The gods, who are defined by their rigidity and their adherence to their divine roles, are ultimately powerless in the face of the chaos that Loki represents. His actions, though often seen as mischievous or disruptive, are part of a larger cosmic plan that cannot be avoided. In many ways, Loki serves as the ultimate force of entropy, the inevitable breakdown of all things. His role in the death of Baldur is the first sign that the divine order is crumbling, that the gods' control over the realms is slipping away. And from this moment, the gods' fate is sealed. No matter how they try to prevent it, no matter how hard they struggle to maintain their power, the forces of chaos will eventually overwhelm them. The death of Baldur is not just a tragic event. It is a symbol of the breakdown of divine authority. In Baldur's death, the gods lose something more than just a beloved member of their family. They lose their sense of invulnerability, their belief that they are immune to the forces that govern the universe. And it is this realization that sends the gods on a futile quest to try to prevent the inevitable. But Loki, who has always been at the center of their troubles, continues to manipulate events behind the scenes. His actions, while they seem to be driven by personal animosity, are in fact part of a larger cosmic order, a cycle of destruction and renewal that must unfold. The gods struggle to contain Loki, to punish him for his crimes, only emphasizes the futility of their position. Despite their immense power, they are unable to control the forces of chaos that Loki represents. When the gods finally capture Loki and imprison him, they do so not out of a sense of justice, but out of a desperate attempt to maintain some semblance of control over the situation. Loki's punishment, in which he is bound to a rock with the entrails of his own son, is a reflection of the gods' fear and frustration. They are no longer able to harness Loki's power for their own benefit. Instead, they are forced to confront the reality that their fate is no longer in their hands. Loki's imprisonment is a moment of catharsis, both for him and for the gods. It represents the final collapse of the old order, the breaking of the bonds that once held the gods together. But even in his imprisonment, Loki remains a figure of transformation. His suffering, which is marked by the venomous serpent that drips poison onto his face, mirrors the suffering he has caused the gods. And yet, even in this moment of torment, Loki remains defiant. His role as agent of chaos is not diminished by his punishment. If anything, it is solidified. He is not merely a trickster or a villain. He is the embodiment of the forces that cannot be controlled, the unpredictable energy that fuels the cosmos. His punishment is not simply a retribution for his actions, but a necessary part of the cosmic cycle, a reminder that the forces of chaos and destruction are as integral to the world as the forces of creation and order. When the time finally comes for Ragnarok, Loki is released from his chains. His escape is not just a physical one. It is symbolic of the larger forces at play in the universe. The gods' efforts to contain him, to bind him in their own way, are ultimately meaningless. Loki's return to the world signals the beginning of the end, the start of a new era that will be defined by the destruction of the gods and the forces of chaos. Loki, freed from his bonds, joins forces with the giants and the other creatures of chaos, leading them into battle against the gods. The gods, who had once relied on Loki to help them, now find themselves at the mercy of the very forces they had sought to control. Loki's role in Ragnarok is the culmination of his life's work, the final destruction of the old order and the beginning of a new cycle. Ragnarok, the end of the gods, is not merely a battle between good and evil. It is a necessary part of the cosmic cycle, a process of death and rebirth that must unfold in order for the world to be renewed. In the end, it is Loki who plays a pivotal role in this transformation. His actions, from his early tricks to his ultimate betrayal, are the spark that ignites the fire that consumes the world. But Loki's role as a harbinger of destruction is not a negative one. In the Norse worldview, destruction is not the end. It is simply a part of the eternal cycle of life. Loki, in his betrayal of the gods and his ultimate role in their death, is not just a destroyer. He is also the creator, the force that clears a way for something new to emerge. Just as a god's reign must come to an end, so too must the world be reborn. And Loki, through his actions, ensures that the cycle continues. Loki's betrayal, his complex relationship with the gods, and his role in the cataclysmic events of Ragnarok represent the essence of the Norse understanding of fate, chaos, and cosmic transformation. Throughout the myths, Loki's actions challenge the gods in ways that go beyond mere mischief or trickery. They force the gods to confront the fragility of their own existence and the inevitability of change. While the gods are symbols of order and stability, Loki is a living manifestation of chaos, the unpredictable force that disrupts the divine equilibrium. His involvement in the death of Bald, the shaping of the future, and ultimately the destruction of Asgard and the gods themselves underscores the idea that creation and destruction are two sides of the same coin in the Norse worldview. The gods, despite their immense power, cannot escape the forces of fate and chaos, and it is this understanding that makes Loki's eventual role in Ragnarok so vital to the larger cosmic order. From the beginning, Loki was always a god who existed on the periphery of the established divine order. He did not fit neatly into the roles and archetypes that define the other gods in Asgard. Odin, the All-Father, is a god of wisdom, war, and sovereignty, while Thor is a god of thunder and protector of humanity. Other gods, like Freya and Freyr, represent fertility and abundance, and they are tied to the forces of nature that ensure the world's balance. Loki, however, defies categorization. His shape-shifting abilities and his willingness to align with both gods and giants place him in a constantly shifting position, neither fully friend nor foe, neither fully loyal nor entirely adversarial. It is this ambiguity that allows him to function as both a companion and an antagonist of the gods, a being who simultaneously helps and harms. Loki's complex relationship with the gods is highlighted in his many interactions with Thor and Odin. For much of their shared history, Loki moves in and out of the gods' favor, using his wit and cunning to navigate situations that often require the gods' strength. In some myths, Loki helps the gods defeat their enemies and resolve conflicts that threaten their realms. His role in aiding Thor to retrieve his stolen hammer Mjolnir, for example, shows that Loki, for all his deceitful tendencies, can be an important ally in a time of need. However, Loki's help is never without a price, and his interventions are often laced with ulterior motives. His assistance is not driven by a desire for the gods' well-being, but rather by his desire to see their strength tested, to challenge their sense of invulnerability. Loki's involvement in the story of Idun's apples is another example of his ability to disrupt the gods' world while simultaneously providing them with the means to recover. Idun, the goddess of youth, keeps the apples that sustain the gods' immortality, But when she is kidnapped by the giant Jotzi, the gods begin to age and weaken. Loki's shape-shifting abilities come into play as he helps retrieve Idun from the clutches of a giant. But his role in this event is not purely altruistic. Loki's assistance is driven by the need to create chaos, to stir things up in a way that challenges the gods' sense of control. It is only when the gods' situation becomes dire, when they begin to feel their mortality creeping upon them, that they must rely on Loki's unique talents. While Loki's actions often appear to be motivated by a desire for mischief or self-interest, there is a deeper and more troubling aspect to his character that comes to light as the myths progress. Loki's greatest crime, the one that sets in motion the chain of events leading to Ragnarok, is his involvement in the death of Balder. Balder, the son of Odin and Frigg, is the beloved god of light and beauty, whose invulnerability makes him a symbol of the god's strength and righteousness. His death, brought about by Loki's trickery, marks the end of an era in Asgard. Loki's role in the death of Balder is both personal and political. On one hand, Loki's motivations appear to stem from jealousy and resentment toward the other gods, particularly Balder, who is seen as perfect and untouchable. But Loki's actions go beyond mere jealousy. They are a calculated attack on the very foundation of the divine order. By causing Balder's death, Loki demonstrates that no one, not even the most beloved of the gods, is beyond the reach of chaos. His trickery exposes the gods' vulnerability and ushers in a period of turmoil and uncertainty. Loki's manipulations and the consequences of Balder's death have far-reaching effects. The gods, stunned by the tragedy, begin to realize that their power is not absolute. They cannot prevent death, and they cannot control the forces of chaos that Loki represents. Balder's death is a prelude to the collapse of the gods' world, a world built on the illusion of divine invincibility. But the gods' grief is tempered by their determination to undo the damage. They attempt to bring Balder back from the dead, sending messengers to every realm to secure promises from every creature and object not to harm him. However, Loki's machinations are far from over. He disguises himself and tricks the goddess Frigg into revealing that mistletoe is the one substance that has not sworn an oath to spare Balder. Using this knowledge, Loki creates the fatal mistletoe dart that leads to Balder's death, delivered by the blind HR, who is tricked by Loki into throwing it. The gods, once again, find themselves powerless in the face of Loki's cunning and manipulation. The death of Balder is the moment when the gods' trust in Loki completely fractures. No longer can they see him as a mere trickster or mischievous companion. Loki's betrayal has far-reaching implications, as it sets in motion the events that will lead to the destruction of Asgard. It is not just the death of Balder that seals the gods' fate, but the knowledge that Loki, the very one they had once trusted, has orchestrated this tragedy for reasons that go beyond personal vendetta. Loki's actions reveal the true nature of chaos itself, not an external force, but an intrinsic part of the universe, one that cannot be controlled or avoided. His betrayal marks the end of the gods' reign, as they are no longer in control of their own fate. Loki's role in Balder's death is a direct challenge to the divine order, and it signals the beginning of the end for Asgard. As the gods come to terms with Balder's death, they begin to turn against Loki. The tension between Loki and the gods deepens, and they realize that his actions have set in motion a chain of events that cannot be undone. The gods, who once relied on Loki for assistance, now see him as their greatest enemy. Loki, for his part, shows no remorse for his actions. His desire for chaos and disruption has only grown stronger, and he revels in the discord he has sown among the gods. But the gods are not without their own plans. They understand that Loki's treachery must be punished, and they eventually capture him, binding him to a rock with the entrails of his own son, and placing a serpent above him to drip venom onto his face. Loki's punishment is as much a reflection of the gods' need for control as it is a manifestation of the chaos he has unleashed. Yet, even in his captivity, Loki's role in the cosmic drama is far from over. Loki's imprisonment represents a god's futile attempt to contain the forces of chaos that he embodies. It is an effort to bind and restrain the very thing that they cannot fully understand or control. But even in his chains, Loki remains a threat to the gods. His release is inevitable, for he is the force that will lead the giants and other creatures of chaos into battle against the gods at the time of Ragnarok. His punishment, however, is not just physical. It is symbolic of the gods' inability to escape the forces of destruction that have always existed in the world. Loki, in his suffering, becomes the embodiment of that chaos. His torment mirrors the suffering he has caused and serves as a reminder that chaos cannot be contained, nor can it be defeated. When Ragnarok finally comes, it is clear that Loki's role is central to the destruction of the gods. The very forces of chaos that Loki has unleashed, the wolf Fenrir, the serpent Jormungandr, and the dead from Hell's realm, are the key players in the final battle. As the forces of destruction converge on Asgard, the gods are faced with the truth that they cannot defeat the chaos they have long sought to control. Loki's betrayal and his role in the destruction of the gods are not merely acts of revenge, but parts of a larger cosmic cycle. The gods are bound by fate, and their destruction is inevitable. Loki, as the agent of chaos, plays a crucial part in the final unraveling of the world. Loki's legacy, however, is not entirely one of evil or destruction. In the Norse worldview, creation and destruction are intertwined, and Loki's role in Ragnarok is both the end and the beginning of a new cycle. While the gods fall, new life will rise from the ashes of the old world. Loki's actions, though devastating, are a necessary part of the cosmic cycle. His betrayal and the destruction of the gods are not a tragic end, but a transformation, a prelude to a new world, a world that will emerge from the chaos and death that he has set in motion. Loki's legacy, then, is one of paradox. He is both the destroyer and the catalyst for renewal. His role in the end of the gods is not simply an act of malevolence, but a necessary part of the eternal cycle of Loki's influence over the gods, and the unfolding events of Ragnarok reveal a deeper, more profound truth about the Norse conception of the world, the constant interplay between creation and destruction. Loki's role, in this sense, transcends the typical boundaries of villainy or mere trickery. His very existence is a manifestation of the necessary chaos that all things must go through to be renewed. In many ways, Loki's story can be understood as a representation of fate itself, a force that neither the gods nor the creatures of the 9 realms can escape, despite their power, wisdom, or strength. He is not just a catalyst for Ragnarok. He is an essential part of the cosmic order, as integral to the process of creation as the gods themselves. Through Loki's actions, we come to understand that the universe, in the Norse worldview, is constantly shifting and transforming, where the death of one thing makes space for something new. What is most striking about Loki's character is his ability to both shape and destroy the world around him. He is not bound by the same rules or limitations that govern the other gods. His shape-shifting abilities, his willingness to align with both gods and giants, and his fluid morality make him a figure who exists outside of the established structures of power. While the gods represent order, stability, and the maintenance of cosmic balance, Loki is the force that disrupts that balance. He exists in opposition to the gods, not because he necessarily hates them, but because he embodies the chaos that is inherent in all things. This is what makes him such a complex and enigmatic figure. He is neither fully good nor fully evil. He is simply a force of nature, and like nature itself, he is unpredictable, often beautiful, and terrifying in his ability to bring both destruction and renewal. At the heart of Loki's story is his relationship with the gods of Asgard, particularly Odin and Thor. Loki is, in many respects, an indispensable companion to the gods. His cleverness, quick wit, and ability to shapeshift make him a valuable ally in times of need. He helps Thor retrieve his stolen hammer, Mjolnir, and aids the gods in various tasks that seem impossible. But as the myths progress, it becomes clear that Loki's assistance is always motivated by something deeper than mere friendship or loyalty. He uses his cunning and abilities to further his own interests, to manipulate events in ways that will lead to chaos and upheaval. The gods, despite their trust in him, begin to sense that Loki is not entirely to be relied upon. But they cannot escape his influence. For Loki is not simply a trickster. He is the agent of change in a world that is always on the brink of transformation. The first true manifestation of Loki's power as a harbinger of doom is his role in the death of Baldur. Baldur, the beloved god of light and beauty, is a symbol of the purity and goodness of the gods. His death, caused by Loki's manipulation, is a turning point in mythology. Baldur's death is not just a loss of God. It is a loss of innocence, the shattering of the divine order that the gods had worked so hard to maintain. In the death of Baldur, Loki not only strikes the heart of the gods' sense of security, but also exposes a fundamental truth. The gods, no matter how powerful or wise, are not invulnerable. They, too, are subject to fate. In many ways, Loki's role in Baldur's death is symbolic of the fragile nature of all things, including the gods themselves. His trickery, while devastating to the gods, is a reminder that chaos, death, and destruction are not separate from life. They are part of the same cycle. The gods' response to Baldur's death is a mixture of grief, shock, and ultimately, a desperate desire to undo the damage. They attempt to bring Baldur back from the dead, sending messengers to every realm to secure promises from every creature and object not to harm him. Loki, however, continues his manipulations from behind the scenes, furthering the idea that the gods' control over the world is an illusion. He deceives Frigg, the mother of Baldur, into revealing that mistletoe is the only thing that could harm her son. Loki uses this information to create the fatal dart of mistletoe that will kill Baldur, using the blind god Hr as an unwitting pawn in his plot. This moment is one of pure betrayal. It is not enough for Loki to simply cause Baldur's death once. He ensures that the event will unfold in the most tragic and irreversible way possible, using the gods' trust against them. In this betrayal, Loki's true nature is revealed. He is no longer just a mischievous trickster of earlier tales. He is now the orchestrator of the gods' downfall, the one who sets in motion the events that will lead to Ragnarok. His actions are no longer petty or harmless. They are acts of profound significance, the first signs that the gods are not as invincible as they believed. Loki, in his manipulation of events, forces the gods to confront the inevitability of their own death and the end of their world. It is not just Baldur's death that marks the beginning of the end for the gods, but the realization that they are no longer in control. Loki, through his cunning and deceit, has revealed to the gods that the world they have built is built on fragile ground, and that their time is running out. The gods' reaction to Loki's betrayal is one of horror and disbelief. They realize that Loki, the very god they had trusted and relied upon, is the one who has caused their greatest loss. In their grief and anger, the gods come together to seek justice, but they find themselves powerless against Loki's influence. Loki is not easily captured or punished. Even when the gods finally manage to imprison him, they do so in a way that symbolizes the futility of their efforts. Loki is bound to the entrails of his own son, and a serpent is placed above him to drip venom onto his face. His wife, Sigyn, stands by him, holding a bowl to catch the venom. But every time she empties the bowl, the poison falls onto Loki's face, causing him to writhe in pain. This punishment is as much a reflection of the gods' fear as it is of Loki's own torment. In his suffering, Loki becomes the embodiment of the very chaos that he has unleashed upon the gods. He is bound, but the forces of destruction and transformation that he represents are beyond containment. Loki's imprisonment, however, does not mark the end of his role in the cosmic drama. His punishment is simply a prelude to his final actions. In the myths, it is foretold that at the time of Ragnarok, Loki will break free from his chains and lead the forces of chaos into battle against the gods. His children, the monstrous wolf Fenrir, the serpent Jormungandr, and the goddess Hel, will all play pivotal roles in the destruction of the gods. These creatures, born of Loki's union with the giantess Angerboa, are the very embodiment of the forces of chaos that the gods have long sought to control. Fenrir, bound by the gods in an attempt to prevent his rise, will break free and devour Odin. Jormungandr, whose massive body encircles the world, will face Thor in a battle that will result in both their deaths. Hel, ruler of the underworld, will raise the dead to fight alongside the forces of chaos. The gods' efforts to contain these destructive forces will be futile, as they realize that the forces of chaos cannot be controlled or avoided. They are intrinsic to the fabric of existence. Loki's release at Ragnarok is the final act of his journey from trickster to the ultimate harbinger of the gods' destruction. In many ways, his release is symbolic of the larger cosmic cycle. The gods, despite their efforts to bind him, cannot escape the fate that awaits them. Loki's return to the world marks the beginning of the end, the final unraveling of the old order. But in this destruction, there is also the promise of renewal. Ragnarok is not just the end of the gods. It is the beginning of a new world, one that will emerge from the ashes of the old. Loki, through his actions, clears the way for the creation of this new world, a world that will rise from the chaos and destruction that is set into motion. In this sense, Loki's role is both destructive and regenerative. The death of the gods, the collapse of Asgard, and the tumult of Ragnarok are all part of a larger cycle of rebirth. Loki, the agent of chaos, is both a destroyer and a harbinger of the new world. His actions, while they may seem motivated by malice, are also necessary for the transformation of the world. The gods, in their attempt to control fate and maintain order, are bound by their own limitations. Loki, on the other hand, is free to act according to the forces of chaos that govern the universe. In this way, his story is one of paradox. He is both a villain and a necessary force in the cosmic cycle. Through his betrayal of the gods and his ultimate involvement in their destruction, Loki ensures that the world is not only destroyed but reborn. In the end, Loki's legacy is not one of mere destruction, but of transformation. His role in Ragnarok, his betrayal of the gods, and his ultimate return as the leader of the forces of chaos reveal the Norse belief in the cyclical nature of the universe. Creation and destruction are not separate entities, but intertwined forces that are constantly in flux. Loki, through his actions, forces the gods to confront their mortality and the inevitable end of their reign. But in doing so, he also clears